in Recovery with Anthony Acampora.
Welcome to Faith in Recovery. My name is Anthony Acampora. I'm your host. We also have a faith-based substance abuse program in Pompano Beach, Florida called Faith in Recovery. We can be reached at faithinrecovery.com or banyantreatmentcenter.com. So blessed to have a real special guest here. He's our Director of Alumni Services and been with Banyan for quite some time now, and his name is Dave Goloski. And here he is. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Anthony. I really appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you for coming down here. Dave's in studio, and I've watched Dave grow over the years. I've been with Banyan about 2.5 years myself, and Dave's been there a little bit longer than that. And he's just done an outstanding job. Just watch the growth, just like the growth with Banyan and how the company is just growing. We were talking about that on the ride down here, and it's just absolutely incredible how God has been blessing this organization, and it's an incredible place to work and to be able to witness what God's doing behind the scenes with our clients and just an amazing staff. So, Dave, welcome again. Thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this field?
So, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, born and raised there. I had two parents, a great, just naturally, spiritual, principled mother. She always went to church on Sundays. She still goes to church. She worked as a nurse on the oncology floor for 34 years and eventually got a director's role in a hospital. Always there for me, always supportive, completely selfless. And on the other side of that, I had a father who, one, was sick with multiple sclerosis, and two, an active alcoholic for my entire life. And I grew up in a home like that where, it was real like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with my father. From before 3 o'clock, he was great. He, loving, caring, encouraging, all those things. And after 3 o'clock, once he had his first drink, it was just like a completely different person. And, seeing that and being raised with that, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying it was traumatizing, but it was definitely some sort of maladjustment to life. And swore up and down I'd never be like him, and never put my family through the things that he would put us through or anything like that. And eventually, through experimentation in middle school, 12 years old, started smoking pot, started drinking, even, tried some other things. And it started to take off in high school. When I was 15, my father passed away. Obviously he had the multiple sclerosis and stuff, but what he died from is a direct result of alcoholism. His internal organs shut down. It was his kidneys first, and then the rest of them just followed. And he was, in a coma, medically induced coma for a little while, and we had to make a decision whether to pull the plug or keep him on life support for longer, knowing that he wouldn't live anyways. And I did that when I was 15, and ultimately, my mother left the decision up to me. She brought me into the hospital that day and asked me what I wanted to do, and I didn't really think that there was a point in suffering, and he was always a man of faith, so I thought it'd be a good time for him to go, be with the Lord, based on, just keeping him alive on a machine or anything like that. And from there on, like I said, my mother was so loving, so kind, so selfless, and my addiction, really, really started to take off then, because she couldn't control me, and I manipulated, and I took advantage of the situation to the best of my ability. And and even when school got involved, counseling and everything like that, I manipulated the situation again to skip school. I wasn't really upset that my father died. I knew that it gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to do, and the way I wanted to do it, and how often I wanted to do it, which was get loaded as often as possible. And from 15 years old till I turned 20, I abused just about everything that you could think of, manipulated, cheated, lied, steal to get what I wanted to get. And I managed to graduate high school even through that, actually a semester early. School was easy for me, I just didn't like going, and I didn't go often. But as far as like taking tests and remembering things, it was fairly easy. And and I try and get straight, maybe get off the hard stuff, just smoke, just drink, whatever the case may be. And eventually, I got another DUI, and it's like my first one, but I had a bunch of underages before, and I lost my license. I realized I can't really drink the way I want to drink, because like I can't not get behind the wheel. And so I started to dabble in these pills, and I said I was just going to do them on the weekends, and eventually like that lasted like a weekend, and I was in full-blown addiction from there on out. And it transferred into the opiate epidemic that we're experiencing now. It wasn't quite as bad then, but from 17 to 20, 21, it got really bad and really ugly. And from living on the streets to living with people that I really didn't like, that I didn't want to be around, and in and out of treatment centers, detoxes, outpatients, whatever the case may be. And I think I went to treatment like a total of 11 times or something. And I finally, I got an opportunity when I was in a treatment center that I've been to about 6 times in Pennsylvania to come to Florida for aftercare. And, they sent me down to an extended care treatment, all men, and it did really well for me from there. They sent me to, a sober living environment, where I completed some outpatient treatment, and that's when I really started to grab onto this thing. As I got a sponsor, I worked with 12 Steps, I got heavily involved. I started sponsoring other men, all the while waiting tables at an IHOP, which was a great job for me in early recovery. And I got a year sober, and that's usually like the credential to start working in the field of substance abuse as like a behavioral health tech, or a CA or an RA, whatever they call it. And I worked for another company for a little bit, and I eventually left there, and I had some friends working down at Banyan, and that was about 3 years ago and some change. We were doing the math in the car on the way down here, and it was right after the Super Bowl of 2015, so I guess that ended up being like February 2nd or 3rd. I started at Banyan. Great. We had 12 patients in our PHP. We had a larger IOP, super small, and we got some really good people behind us at Banyan, and some outreach across the United States, and we had gotten our new executive director, who now is our chief operating officer, Eric. At the time, I think he started like a week after me, and we really started growing. We really started to get the fundamentals down of where we wanted to take Banyan and where it was going. And I did the behavioral health tech thing for about 9 months. I went and got certified as a recovery coach, and I did that for a little bit. A lot of spiritual counseling, bridging the gap from treatment to recovery for patients before they were leaving. And that was kind of my passion, really helping people see what recovery actually is and what it looks like, because so many people think, oh, I just got to try and not drink today, or I just got to try and not use today, and I got to go through life from here on out not using. And that's not really the case. It's that we get to live a fulfilling lifestyle, and eventually it falls to the wayside. It's not something we even think about anymore. Yeah. But if we're continuously trying to fight off the urge to use or drink, and we don't fill ourselves with something else, whether it be God, the fellowship, helping others, all those sorts of things that we really start to fill ourselves with and start to become our passion, we're never going to make it.
Right. Wow, that's some great. I'm taking notes here on some of the things I want to respond to, but the last thing you said was so powerful, because sometimes, in recovery, it's the focus is so much on what I can't do. Well, I can't do this anymore, and I can't drink at barbecues, and I can't go to this event and do this. And it's really what we need to focus on is what we can do. And all of this stuff, like you were talking about, the manipulation and the lying and that lifestyle of, we start to just be in a state of shame a lot of times, because we know we're doing the wrong thing, but the lying and the manipulation kind of comes with it. It's part of the package of addiction.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a byproduct of what the real problem is, and thank God I had a mother who continued to pray, although she set some boundaries with me, and a family that continued to pray for me, because they really earned me my seat here.
Yeah.
It wasn't without their prayers or their faith that, as long as I was still breathing, there was some sort of hope, and they can continue to pray to God for me to get this thing, that I made it here. It wasn't anything that I did really well that landed me here. I took the suggestions that were the same in the first treatment center as they were in the last one.
Yes. Great humility that you show. You're a humble guy, and that's such a huge part of whether it's 12-step or faith-based. I mean, humility is a big part of that. When we start to become prideful and say, hey, I got this, or I'm going to do this on my own, or we start to take, if it's a faith programming, our will back. We're saying if you're saying the Lord's Prayer, your will be done to God, your kingdom come, your will be done. So as soon as we start to take our will back, that's when we could run into problems. But it makes it so much easier to do this when you have that humility, like you're talking about here. So that's awesome. The other thing you said was, I don't know how many times I've heard this. So for the people listening out there that they think, smoking pot's okay and they're legalizing it all over, different states now, I must have heard testimonies from people in AA or NA meetings hundreds of times, and probably about, I would say 90% of the time it starts with, I started off smoking pot.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a gateway drug. You start doing that, and then you end up moving to something else and something else. And just from experience and even being in this field, you hear it over and over again, time and time again. Started out smoking pot, went to whatever, moved on to this, ended up with heroin, and so got to be careful with that.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody, in their youth, in their teenage years, is like, okay, well, I'm just going to jump right into, shooting heroin or smoking crack cocaine or smoking crystal meth or whatever the case may be, and they're like, I'm going to end up homeless in the streets in 2 years. I can't wait. It's all like, okay, well, let me try this because my friends are doing it. And it adapts, well, hey, I've never gotten trouble smoking pot. What's one line going to do?
Right.
Okay, well, that line doesn't do what I need it to do anymore. And before I know it, I'm homeless in the street somewhere, with a needle in my arm. It's never how we mapped it out, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, going back to Banyan, so I did that recovery coaching stuff for a while, and then I stepped into the role. My old boss, he asked me if I would be interested in doing this. The guy who was doing it before me was kind of moving on to be a therapist, and that's where his main focus was. And I stepped into that role, and really I had no blueprint. It was all blank, and I kind of jumped into this. I had relationships with most of the patients, and now, like, if you've ever been in a treatment center or something like that, it's always like this mysterious thing that, like, oh, we want to be friends with them on Facebook, or we want to be able to talk to them after treatment, and we have to hold these boundaries, right? Because it's ethical, it's enforced by law and everything like that. But with alumni service, it's really, really cool, right? Because you get to be involved, you get to follow up, you get to see how their life is going after treatment, right? And I always say this, I have hands down the best job in the company, and people are like, well, why do you say that? And I give them a reason. I say, well, these therapists, they walk you through all these problems, they listen to you, they see you go through it physically, and then you move on from treatment, and your life really starts to materialize. You get a car, you get your family back, you become a father or mother to your kids, you become a brother or sister to your siblings, you get to be a son or a daughter to your mother, father, whatever the case may be. You get a good job, and life starts to really look up for the first time in a long time. And I'm the one who gets to stay in contact and see, and my team, and see what that looks like, what the real work you did while in treatment and you continue to do after you left materializes and looks like after treatment.
Yeah, that's perfect. You see the outcome. So many times our therapists in the Faith and Recovery program, like, I wonder how he's doing. Oh, I would love to know how she is. And, you invest a lot in them, and you want them to succeed, and then it kind of just stops right when they walk out that door. That's why it's a great thing, and you do a great job with that, with building that rapport. And, I've heard you speak at speaker meetings and things like that at Banyan, and just Powerful, very, very powerful, and it comes from the heart, and it's authentic, and that's what people can relate to. It's not just somebody telling a story, or these are real things. This is a real person. This is what I went through. This is where I was. I was lost, and now I'm found. We're going to need to take a quick break. We will be back in 30 seconds. Banyan Treatment Center's Faith and Recovery Program.
Lord, I come, I confess.
If you are a loved one or struggling with drug and alcohol problems or mental health disorders, call Banyan Treatment Center at 888-270-5712. Visit our website, faithandrecovery.com. We have a compassionate and understanding staff that were once in your shoes, and our clinical team is highly skilled to handle all types of addictions. If you need help, don't wait. Call 888-270-5712 or visit our website, faithandrecovery.com.
Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you.
Welcome back, Bannyan's Faith and Recovery radio program. My name is Anthony Acampora. I am your host. We are here with Dave Goloski, our Director of Alumni Services. We would love to hear feedback or questions. If you want to message me on Facebook, it's Anthony Acampora, Acampora. Shoot us some questions, and we'll address them on the next show and future shows, or just feedback. How do you think the show is? What can we do differently? What would you like to see or hear? All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. We're back with Dave Goloski. We're talking a really deep conversation about addiction and recovery and how to overcome and some of the stumbling blocks. One of the questions I did want to ask you, though, Dave, from previously, what you were saying, decision at 15 years old about with your dad and your mother gave you that decision. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because that would seem like it would really have a profound impact on your life.
Yeah. Well, hindsight is 20/20, so I can see now, lacking that father figure throughout his addiction and watching his struggles, and now more than ever do I relate and am I empathetic and sympathetic to what he was experiencing, because prior to that he had 13 years sober. He was actively involved in AA. He was actively involved in his faith. He went to church every single week, and just kind of fell to the wayside. And I think a lot of it was, between the multiple sclerosis and not being able to provide for his family because he was on Social Security because of his actual disease, his physical disease of multiple sclerosis, and it really reverted back into his alcoholism. Just to cope with, losing that manhood, losing that pride, and everything like that. And so now in my recovery, I've been where I don't want to use, but I have to use to survive,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And when I understood that, and when I finally got sober this time for an extended amount of time, I had celebrated 4 years of recovery in November. When I finally got there, and I realized that man didn't want to drink for years, if not, the entire time since he picked up again. But he did it anyways, and I understood that, and I felt it myself, knowing what that was like. It was a game changer for me. And my relationship now with him being passed for almost, it was 9 years this year, almost a decade is stronger with him than it's ever been. My mom, she's his wife. I'm his blood, and she didn't want to make that decision without me being involved. And it was just the right thing to do. I think we all have this moral code that we're born with, we're instilled with. I think,
Sure.
based on the actions we take and the values we have, we grow further from it. But I think that, the fundamental idea of God, the fundamental idea of proper morals is instilled in everybody from birth. And it could be nature, it could be nurture, something along that line skews that, changes it, everybody's values and morals start to change. And but I knew that there was no sense in keeping this man alive on a defibrillator, on life support, and just letting him suffer, when he was essentially just turning into a vegetable, physically, mentally. His brain was without oxygen at some point. He suffered a heart attack while he was in there. On top of all of his internal organs shutting down, that I knew that it was just time, and that gets into a whole different ethics conversation. Keep somebody alive, don't, whatever the case may be. And I'm not really interested in entertaining that on here, but for me, and I think my mother would definitely agree, it felt like the right thing to do.
Got it.
To let him go be with the Lord.
Thank you. Let's talk, since we're talking about the families. You interact, like you said, with the clients, especially afterward and after treatment and things, and also the families. I know you're speaking to them all the time. What if a family member's listening and they have a loved one who's in active addiction, or maybe just came out of treatment and is just starting their recovery? What do you suggest? What are some things that you could say to them as far as having an impact, and what are some red flags that maybe they should be looking for or be aware of, so we could stay out in front of this and not just be in a reactive mode all the time? What do you think there?
Something I absolutely know is that, I had a high school teacher, and he always said this. He always said, pay yourself first, and I think that's so true in families of people addicted, that you need to take care of your own health, your own well-being, set your firm boundaries with your loved one, so that you don't get wrapped up in this too.
Right.
Because I may be suffering from addiction directly, but I can promise you that indirectly my mother suffered, my grandmother, any girl that I came into contact with, multiple friends, any family member, they suffered from addiction too.
Right.
It was just indirect suffering.
Yes.
And that's what you got to keep your mind right. You got to keep, your hope. You got to keep your positivity, and you can't let, the actions of somebody who might not be done using, despite what you say, despite what boundaries you place, you've got to wait, and you've got to make sure that you are available to them when they do want help. You never want to. Obviously, some things come out in emotion. They come out, because it's a heartache. I couldn't, my daughter, my fiance is, she's an addict as well, and it's something I think about all the time, is that we're both in recovery, so that that gene, that trait, is somewhere in our DNA and our beautiful 2.5-year-old daughter, and it's a huge fear for me, and I think about it all the time. I mean, I do it in my personal life. I help addicts. I do it for a career, but then you hit me like a ton of bricks if my daughter comes home and she has a cocaine habit or a heroin habit. I couldn't imagine. But looking at that, I think that it's something you have to firmly hold your boundaries, set them, and don't waive those for anything. If you set those boundaries and you hold to them, eventually that person's going to be, the addicted is going to be able to come back to you and say, okay, I'm willing to play by your rules, and this is what I want to do for help.
Right.
You got to let them know that you love them, encourage them to get help, but you got to let them know that you can't enable them. And with a mother's love for a son or a father's love for a daughter, I'm sure that's a really fine line to be a part of. But go to support groups. They're all over the country now. I mean, we're facing the worst epidemic we've ever seen with the opioids. Support groups are in almost every major city. Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, they're everywhere.
Right.
It's something to really get involved with.
Our therapist in Faith and Recovery, Alex Lewis, she mentioned this on a show previously, but she said, talked about the families and how, like you said, they're going through stuff too. Sometimes I think it's actually more difficult for the family, because when you're in active addiction, you're not really thinking too much other than self and what you need to, whatever drug you need or whatever, fix that you need to get. And the families are kind of just out there. They're just in a, sometimes in the dark, and it's very difficult for them. But they're dealing with stuff too, and they have to heal, and they have to actually sometimes forgive in many cases as well. But that's good. Those are some good points. What are some what are some stumbling blocks that you see with clients? I mean, they're in and out. They come in, they do a survey with you after they complete the program at Banyan, and there's a questionnaire. And, you know, I know there's sometimes you so want someone to succeed, and you're like, I would hate it. I felt like this morning with someone. I would hate to see this guy not make it. And, you know, yet a lot of times we see, especially if they go back to those same people, places, and things, and they return to that, they get kind of pulled into that old patterns of behavior. And it's always the case of it. You know, you put your hand out to help someone, it's easier for them to pull you down than you to pull them up. So we have to be so careful of who we are surrounded with. We have about 30 seconds and we're going to close. What do you think about that?
On that topic, you know, a lot of things is like not getting involved right away. You know, it's you go from treatment where you're structured, you're living, you're told when to get up, told when to eat, told when to go to group, and you don't go and you don't continue that right away. You think, I didn't have a drink today, it's okay. And that's not necessarily the case, you know, is that we have to stay in this regimen, we have to stay in this routine, we have to stay in these disciplines day in and day
Absolutely.
out. And it gets easier, but in the beginning, it's super key.
Absolutely. Yeah, stay on that schedule. From a faith perspective, you know, the Apostle Paul talks about renewing your mind daily. It's a daily process. It's a daily thing. It's just, we don't just do it and then, you know, everything's okay and we just stop. We still have to stick with this stuff. I want to thank Dave Goloski for coming on the show today. He's here in studio, our Director of Alumni Services at Banyan Treatment Center in Pompano Beach. It's a substance abuse facility. We can be reached at banyantreatmentcenter.com. That's our website. Or our faith program is Faith and Recovery. It's faithandrecovery.com. Thank you for joining us, and God bless you.
Thanks a lot for having me.